Hey, I'm Felissa Rose, and you're watching Keto and Crime.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Keto and Crime Classic. Today we're going back in time to one I did in 2020 during the pandemic. I have pandemic hair. This is also one of the very first ones I did from my new office, so there's some little bit of shaking going on with the screen. I do apologize for that. Just listen to me more than look at me in this one, but it's got a lot of great information. And what we're talking about today is the LDS Church. We've spent so much time talking about the Valo Dabell case and the beliefs that they had, but what does the actual mainstream LDS Church believe? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Their beliefs, their history. What you're looking at is a cartoon that was actually banned by the LDS Church, but it does have a lot of really good information on some of their beliefs that may not be as mainstream today, but it certainly was at the time that the church was established. Just like a lot of churches, they've cleaned up their image, they've cleaned up what they believe to be kinder and gentler for a new age. But in the past, they had some pretty weird beliefs, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And with that being said, let's dive into the LDS Church or the Mormons and what they believe. A Keto and Crime Classic. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome back to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. I am so sorry I missed Wednesday. I was planning to have this same video out to you guys, but unfortunately I had a severe allergy attack and spent most of my day sniffing and snorting and red eyes, red nose, congested. I would have been more of a hot mess to look at than I normally am, and certainly would have sounded like a hot mess. So had to push it off and put this out on Friday. Be back to my normal schedule today, Sunday, Reddit read on Tuesday, then back to normal true crime. As for my live streams, I'm probably going to start doing one on Thursday nights alone because my group stream is not wanting to cooperate. So I will get those started probably next week. I apologize for the delay there. I really do. But let's get into it. Today we're back to Cult Watch. And even though the majority of the world looks at this religion I'm about to talk about as a cult, it is actually just another mainstream Abrahamic religion. I don't really consider it a Christian church because of their doctrine, which we'll talk about, but it is definitely a mainstream religion. In fact, we are coming up on its 189th year. It was actually founded April 6, 1830 in upstate New York by a man named Joseph Smith. So I think you know what we're about to get into. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons. Let's get into it, shall we? Why two names, you may ask. Why are they the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but more commonly known as the Mormons? Well, we're going to touch on that. They call themselves officially the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because unlike most other Christian-based religions, they do not believe that the age of saints, prophets, those kind of things ended with the Old and New Testaments in the Bible. They believe that there are still saints and prophets born and walking among us today, hence the name Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because they consider us in the last days, as most churches have considered us in the last days for many, many, many hundreds of thousands of years, but we're just not even going to get into that. Anyway, they're called Mormons because of their companion to the Bible, called the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon was supposedly written by the son of one of the last one of the last prophets that God set upon the New World, or North America as we know it today, way back in the same days as the Old and New Testaments, there were prophets here according to them, here in the United States, North America. And one of those prophets' name was Moroni. So Mormon comes from him. His son was actually the one that buried the Book of Mormon for Joseph Smith to find way back in the 1800s. So that's why there's the two names. But let's get into what they actually believe. Then we'll get into their history and where they stand. They have an unusual belief system. Basically, they believe in aliens. They believe there are alien worlds out there, that we are not alone in the universe, and that God, who they consider the Heavenly Father, or the major God, name is Elohim, is what they actually call God the Father, was one of many, many gods. I believe in multiple gods. Elohim is just one of many gods that was married to many, many goddesses. And he was given reign over Earth as his planet. They believe that when a person dies, they have the ability to become a god married to many goddesses of their own planet. So they believe if you are a member of the LDS Church, have the ability to die and become a god yourself. So Elohim was just one of many gods that happened to have dominion over the earth. And he supposedly had two children, Jesus and Lucifer. Yes, in the Mormon faith, or the LDS faith, Jesus and the devil are brothers, and they basically were vying for their fathers, for Elohim's favor in becoming the savior or the leader, or the ones that would actually put forth spirit children, which we are all. If you were born, you're considered a spirit child on this earth. Well, Jesus won his father's favor and was sent down to earth to be born in flesh form. Well, evidently Lucifer wasn't having it, and that's how they explain the great fall. He convinced about a third of the spirits or angels in heaven to fight with him against Jesus, and he was defeated and banished, where he became the devil. All those that fought with him became demons. Those that fought with Jesus against him became angels, and later on were born on earth as spirit children with the ability to become a god later on, a god or a goddess. They also believe in goddesses later on. At least they used to. Interesting how that would change later on. Then there was the third of spirit beings or angels that only kind of halfway fought or sort of sat that one out. They were cursed with dark skin. Now, I'm not saying this because I believe in it. I'm saying this because this is what I've studied and what I've read. They believed that people with dark skin are descended from these lukewarm spirits and will never have the ability to become a god themselves. And that's how they explain the black or dark skin races. Now, they've backed this up a lot, as you can imagine, over the years, but it's still there in their doctrine if you dig far enough. So they believed that dark skins were the actual people or the actual angels that only halfway supported Jesus, and so they really weren't true, if that makes sense. And also later on, after Elohim and his goddess wife, who is unnamed, came down to earth in flesh form, they became Adam and Eve. The same creation story there. You had old Lucifer coming up to basically fool his father's prodigy, the fall. It's all pretty much the same there, except they believe the Garden of Eden was somewhere near Branson, Missouri, instead of in the Middle East. So that's how they believe it. They also believe that the story of Cain and Abel was exactly the same, and that more dark-skinned people came from being descendants of Cain, that all these spirit angels that came down that were born with black skin were born with the mark of Cain. So that's how they explained it. And for the longest time, I would say up until the late 70s, African American people or dark-skinned races were not allowed into the Mormon temple. Like I said, they've backtracked on that a lot, but it's there. And so Jesus was chosen after Elohim and his wife created mankind below, and then they needed the Savior. Elohim came down from heaven, took the form of flesh, had sexual relations with the Virgin Mary, and then she gave birth to Jesus in man form, and then you have the same story of Jesus and the apostles that you would have in the Bible. Now, except they definitely don't believe in the virgin birth, if you know what I mean. Now, they believe he went through the same trials and tribulations on earth as presented in the Bible, but they also believe when he was crucified, instead of just remaining in the tomb and going down to hell, like is sometimes put forth in some versions of the Bible, and freeing the souls already sent to hell, he also journeyed to North America and proselytized and sealed the saints here in North America, which were, of course, the Native Americans that were already living here. And those Native Americans, they believed, were two lost tribes of Israel that somehow made it across the ocean to North America, and they were divided into two sects. You had the Lamanites, which were dark-skinned, there that goes again, and the Nephites, which were light-skinned. After Jesus ascended up into heaven and then went back over and then ascended again, I suppose, there was a great war between the Lamanites and the Nephites here in North America, and the Lamanites won. They vanquished all the white-skinned Nephites. There's that skin color again. And it was from this the lost tribe here, the Nephites, that the Book of Mormon came. Among the Nephites was a young man by the name of Mormon, who was a prophet that had supposedly been visited by Jesus at the age of 15, had written what is to be known now as the Book of Mormon on several tablets. These were passed on to his son Moroni, who was one of the last Nephites left alive after this war, and he trekked into the mountain range near the Adirondacks in upstate New York and buried them in the earth with a magic viewfinder. I guess it's a Viewmaster. You remember those? That would help someone appointed by God later on to find them and know what happened here in North America. According to this, Moroni died and then later on returned to earth as an angel and appeared to a young prospector, a young gold prospector who was famous for telling tall tales by the name of Joseph Smith in 1823. And supposedly this is where Mormonism as we know it today began. He supposedly found these books, or these tablets, using Moroni's guidance. He found them. He also used that little magic Viewmaster to read them and translate them, even though they were written in a secondary Egyptian language. And he himself, Joseph Smith, constructed what we know as the Book of Mormon. And that is their companion book to the Bible. Among other tall tales, other than finding these books, Joseph Smith also said that he was spoken to by both Elohim, God, and Jesus, that kind of directed him that he was their modern day prophet and he should build up a church for them, that all the other Christian religions had it wrong and that they were going to teach him to do it right. And the official Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was born. So basically, it started in upstate New York. Joseph Smith gathered a few followers. Among the other things that they talked about, they considered Joseph Smith equal, even superior to Jesus in a lot of ways. He's often quoted as saying that I can save mankind a lot better than Jesus ever did. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he was quoted as saying that. And as you can imagine, people in upstate New York weren't having it. Still a very strong Presbyterian and just basic Protestant influence. So Joseph Smith and his followers, including his multiple wives, because they did believe that polygamy was the way of God, soon left New York and headed for the Midwest and later on the Far West. But they settled in Missouri. And that's where he established the doctrine that the actual Garden of Eden had been near Branson, Missouri, instead of in the Middle East. They lived very peacefully in Missouri for a while, gathered followers, practiced polygamy, practiced their type of doctrine, but the people of western Missouri and later on Illinois weren't having it. In 1833, Missouri began an expulsion program where they were told to physically, even with force, expel the Mormons from the state of Missouri. And this spread to Illinois. By 1839, you had people calling themselves saints from the Mormon Church trying to forcibly settle themselves in western Missouri and Illinois. And then you had, by 1839, the actual governor of Illinois and Missouri ordered all members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be forcibly expelled from their states. They fought it for a while. They fought it in the legislature. They fought actual battles. But it came to a head on June 27, 1844, where Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were murdered by a mob in Carthage, Illinois. And after this happened, the Mormon Church was kind of in an uproar because not only had they lost their prophet, they had also lost their heir apparent, who was Hiram. And you basically had a secession of Mormons. Mormons splintered into several different sects. And you had the saints, the people that called themselves saints, that were more brutal, more in your face about protecting their faith, kind of rise to the top of the splintered LDS Church. And the leader of the saints was a man by the name of Brigham Young. He was a member of the 12 Apostles of Joseph Smith, so he was quite well known. And he basically took the saints, the ones that were more aggressive about their faith, and he went on a westward journey toward the great plains of the West, where there was little to no settlement yet. And he figured they would be safe to practice their religion there. And they basically went on a pilgrimage across the United States, settling in Utah, and building the city now known as Salt Lake City. By 1857, there were over 60,000 Mormons living in the Salt Lake City area, what would be the Salt Lake City area. And they were practicing polygamy. They were practicing their own brand of religion. They built huge churches, huge temples. And by the late 1857, there were already tensions between them and other settlers over land, over religion, and they got themselves into another sort of squabble. Brigham Young himself had risen to be a territorial governor by this time, because Mormons were the huge majority of the population in Utah. And by 1858, there was an all-out war for the Utah territory, which actually the United States Army had to come in and basically take over the territory. And as a compromise to end the war peaceably, Brigham Young offered to step down from being territorial governor, which he did, and a non-Mormon governor by the name of Alfred Cumming was appointed. However, being the majority of the population, Mormon control of Utah was pretty well established. By the time Brigham Young died in 1877, the Utah held the greatest concentrations of Mormons in the country. It's still that way today, although there are factions in Idaho, in Arizona. The Mormon Church is huge out west. And that's kind of the way Utah has always been. But they didn't stop people from still attacking the Mormon way of life. In 1878, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Reynolds versus United States that freedom of religion does not allow people to practice plural marriage outside of the law of the United States. and they officially outlawed the use of religious freedom for a defense of plural marriage, and plural marriage became illegal in the state of Utah when it was admitted as a full-fledged state in 1896. This made a lot of Mormon factions split off and go out and sort of practice their own thing, because the mainstream Mormon Church agreed with the state and later on outlawed polygamy itself. But there were still some fraction groups that believed that they had the right to practice plural marriages, and they went out and formed compounds, separatist units, where polygamy is still practiced today. Although the traditional Mormon Church has severed all ties with these with these splinterists, as they call them. However, it is these faction groups that get a lot of the attention. There's been many of them busted for basically enslaving young girls by the age of 12 and 13, marrying them off to old men. They're not allowed to practice birth control. Girls are not educated, which is ironic, because during Brigham Young's reign as top Mormon, they basically did away with the doctrine of the goddess. Remember way back that there were gods and goddesses. They did away with the Heavenly Mother or the goddess doctrine, and women kind of became a subjugated gender, as they were in a lot of religions. And so they did away with that. And so also in the 1970s, they kind of backtracked off their whole dark skin doctrine, saying that that was a misinterpretation. It was wrongly read, so that yes, African Americans can absolutely achieve godhood, which is what everybody in the Mormon Church's ultimate goal is. And they also started, during Brigham Young's heyday, the art of what they call excommunicating, which is basically throwing out any member of the Mormon Church that did not stay in straight line with the mainline Mormon Church. So the polygamists, these polygamist factions that we talked about, they were excommunicated, splintered off from the normal group. Anybody found guilty of the sin of, let's say, homosexuality, or any other sin that the Mormon Church considered wrong, could be thrown out. So they started kind of severing what they thought were bad elements from the church. And that brings us up to the modern times. Utah is still the center of the Mormon world, with their Grand Cathedral being right there in Salt Lake City. They've become less of what you would consider a militant group and more of just a normal conservative religious group. They still practice their doctrines a lot in secret. If you're not a member of the Mormon Church, you cannot enter the Mormon temple during ceremonies, because a lot of that is still very secretive. I'm sure it goes back to their actual doctrine, which we've already talked about. By the time they are teenagers, all young men and women are sent on missions. They are probably the most proselytizing religion out there. They've even had plans to send missionaries into space to proselytize to aliens that they believe are out there. I mean, they believe in bringing everybody into the fold. And yes, they do the strange things like the Mormon underwear, which have like symbols on them about their actual doctrine. They believe that it reminds people to maintain sexual purity. And they've taken a very conservative, anti-establishment stance on things like same-sex marriage, euthanasia, really gambling, really anything that they consider to be debauchery, they are against. And as a result, Utah is a very conservative state. But you have a lot of Mormons in big business. Marriott Corporation started as a Mormon company. You have Mitt Romney, who is a very well-known senator from the state of Utah, who ran for president and is still very popular. So you have Mormons becoming a lot more mainstream. There's even a musical out there called the Book of Mormon, which, by the creators of South Park, which is very definitely poking fun at the Mormons, but they've actually taken kind of a lighthearted interpretation of that, saying, well, the Book of Mormon may be funny to you, but it'll also get you into heaven. So, I mean, they're kind of, they have a good sense of humor about that, let's just say. They are pacifists. They do not believe in war, so you'll find very few Mormons serving in the U.S. Armed Forces or in the police force or anything like that. They really want people just to grow up, live a godly life, and try to bring people into the fold. Now, like I said, a lot of people consider this a cult, and I guess a lot of its activities are cult-like, but I kind of hesitate to call it a full-fledged cult. Of course, it's a religion just like a lot of the Islamic religions that control a lot of, and Christian religions that control a lot of aspects of your life. So in that way, yes, it does control personal behavior, but is it an actual cult? No, I'm going to call it just a mainstream religion, though one that is very interesting to study, and I had a lot of fun looking into this. As I said, they are considered now just a mainstream religion, though with a lot of weird beliefs. I would say they're not as weird as Scientologists, but they're certainly more weird than I would want to be associated with. But their largest concentration still is the state of Utah, Arizona, Idaho. You do have those splinter organizations that are always getting themselves into trouble for polygamy and child endangerment, things of that nature, but the Mormon Church, the mainstream Mormon Church, as I said, has already excommunicated those and does not claim ownership of those. It's just like, you know, different sects of different Christian denominations that kind of go off the deep end a little bit. I mean, yes, they might believe some of the same things, but, you know, Westboro Baptist Church, you're going to find very few actual mainstream Baptist organizations that would claim the Westboro Baptist Church. So it's kind of like that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that brief look into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was quite interesting. I enjoyed it. So I hope you'll continue to watch. Come back if you want to support the channel or the podcast. Links are below for that. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. Keto Comic.